Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video. In this video, we're back talking about the Yakuza series. This time, I'm going to be ranking every game in the Kiryu Saga, which does include 7 games here, Yakuza's 0 through 6. Now, for Yakuza's 1 and 2, I've actually only played the Kiwami versions of these games, so those will be the versions that I will be assessing here. Though, to be honest, when I play the Yakuza series, most of the reason I do play the series to begin with is for the main narratives anyway, which have largely stayed the same between those two versions, so I doubt it would make that much of a difference at the end of the day. Also, the reason why I'm only ranking the Kiryu Saga here is because I just feel like it makes for the most focused ranking here. There was a thought of adding Like a Dragon to the list, but I do feel like a Dragon just feels like such a radically different game than these Yakuza games to warrant being on the list. And also, when we're talking about the spin-offs like Judgment and Yakuza Dead Souls and stuff like that, again, they're just radically different games and don't really feel right to be on the same list. But with that out of the way, we do have 7 games to rank here. Let's get started with number 7. At number 7, the worst Yakuza game, in my personal opinion, is Yakuza 3. And I've seen some mixed reactions to Yakuza 3. I think there's some people that definitely agree with my assessment here. I think there's definitely some people that look at it as one of the most underrated games in the series. I did not like Yakuza 3. And a lot of the reason for that is just because of how the game was structured. I really did not enjoy the time that you spent at the orphanage with the kids. And I did at first. At first, I was actually really happy that we were getting this different style of Yakuza game where we were playing as Kiryu, dealing with the issues with these kids, and it felt like a nice change of pace at first, but then it went on and on and on and on, and it never really amounted to much, and it really always felt to me like Yakuza 3 was kind of just a filler game. In many ways, it just feels like filler. When I'm playing Yakuza's 1 and 2, it feels like those are very important stories to Kiryu as a character. While with Yakuza 3, this always felt to me like a side story. Even when we're talking about the main narrative, the narrative that the end game revolves around with Mine and Joji and all that stuff, it really just feels like a plot you would see from a reunion movie than the plot of a main series game. To me, it really felt like they just made Yakuza 3 to make Yakuza 3. It really feels like it serves no real purpose. And to me, the overall plot was just so over the top, even more so than the other Yakuza games with the involvement of the CIA in this secret group called Black Monday and all this stuff. It was just so ridiculous to me that I never took this game seriously. So for me, it always landed as the worst game in the Yakuza series. Now at number 6, this might be unpopular, and I think these next 2 opinions will be pretty unpopular. But at number 6 here, we do have a game that is looked at as one of the better games in the series. We do have Yakuza 5. And Yakuza 5 was tough for me because I was coming into it expecting to really love it. I mean, we'll talk about Yakuza 4, but from what I had heard, Yakuza 5 was essentially an expanded version of Yakuza 4. And that sounded like an interesting prospect to me. However, I do feel like Yakuza 5 takes what Yakuza 4 does and then just really bloats it. To me, Yakuza 5 felt like a story that was based around Kiryu and Haruka. However, we also have the characters of Seijima and Akiyama and Shinada being thrown in there as well. And because of that, I feel like the story just comes out of it becoming really unfocused. And there are just many points within the game where I'm just thinking, is this even necessary? Why was this here? It really feels like they tried so hard to tell the most complex story that they could. But I think through that, they kind of forgot that they were telling a story. I will say that gameplay-wise, I did like certain improvements in this game. I think each of the characters did have different fighting styles, and that did add a bit to the game here. Plus, also, each of the characters have their own different open worlds to explore. I just feel like they overextended with this game. I feel like this is a game that you can definitely tell they came into it expecting to make the biggest Yakuza game they've ever made. And through that, I think they just lost their way. And I think they end up making an experience that for me just does not work. It's an experience that for me would have been so much better if it was a tighter and more concise narrative instead of the piece of bloat that it really is. So for that reason, Yakuza 5 lands here at number 6. Now number 5, this is going to be very unpopular, and I will preface this with saying that this was the first game I played in the series, and I do think if I were to replay it now, my opinion of it would probably increase. But as of right now, at number 5, I do have Yakuza 0, which again is universally looked at as the best Yakuza game in the series. And I think in retrospect, when I look back at my experience with Yakuza 0, I can see where people see that. But when I personally played Yakuza 0, which is again before I played any of these other games, it was my first experience with the series, I just could not get into it. And I did finish the game. I finished the game. I came out of the experience kind of just meh on the series as a whole. And it really wasn't until I played Kiwami that I decided, okay, let's continue on with this. As again, for me, with the Yakuza series, what I became so invested in was the character of Kiryu. I love the character of Kiryu and the struggles that he goes through. But to me, I just feel like Yakuza 0 doesn't really focus that much on Kiryu as a character. While there's obviously a lot of setup of things that do eventually happen later on in the Yakuza series, which is cool. And also, we have Majima and see his progression as a character. To me, Kiryu is kind of just sidelined in the game. I mean, yes, he's there and he does have stuff going on, but it's to me, it never felt like it was super important. To me, this game doesn't really feel like it serves a purpose. I don't feel like this was a necessary prequel to the series. I feel like if I never played 0, my understanding of the series as a whole doesn't really change that much. That being said, again, 0, I do think tells the most complex story out of the 7 games I'm ranking here, and through that, I do think comes some pros and cons. I do think there is a decent amount of bloat in this game. I do feel like there were many points within this game that I just felt kind of bored. And I was like, when can this end? But there's also some really great set pieces within this game. There are some really good story beats within this game. But again, to me, the most compelling part of this game was Majima's story. While I felt like while playing as Kiryu, I just didn't find him nearly as interesting of a character as I later found him in the future games in the series. As a game, though, I do feel like the different styles of combat are really great. This is probably the game that I spent the most time playing the sub-stories. I feel like the sub-stories as a whole were pretty solid. The progression system in this game is pretty good. But overall, though, just something about Yakuza 0 didn't really click with me as much as some of the other games I played later on in the series. So while I don't think Yakuza 0 is a bad game, it certainly isn't. It's just a game that didn't really connect with me. Though I will fully admit that I probably do need to replay this one again, now with the context of the rest of the series, to fully appreciate it, which I do feel like I'll probably do at some point down the road, but for now, it does land here at number 5. Now at number 4. At number 4, we do have the first of the remakes. We do have Yakuza Kiwami 2. Which might not be a popular opinion. I do know 2 is another one of the more popular entries in the series, and I really like 2. I think it is a great game. I really love the story between Kiryu and Ryuji Goda. I do think Goda is one of the better villains within the series, feels like a great antithesis to Kiryu. I also like Sayama in this game. I really like her relationship with Kiryu. I do feel like a couple knocks against this game, though, for me. I do feel like there are definitely points in this game where it feels like we're just doing stuff for the sake of it. There's a lot of filler. It feels like there's a lot of dumb fetch quests within this game that don't really add much to the overall experience. And the overall narrative for me does just feel kind of ridiculous, especially by the end of it. The amount of plot twists that happen within the last chapter of the game is ridiculous. I mean, it's so ridiculous in kind of a fun way at this point, but I remember when playing the game initially, I was thinking, this is so dumb, and how many times the game fakes you out into thinking that this is the final boss battle of the game. But despite that, I really like Yakuza Kiwami 2. I mean, really, the top 4 games that we're talking about here, I all really, really like. For me, I do feel like there were points within Yakuza Kiwami 2 that felt a bit slower to me than the other 3 games we'll be talking about. So for me, it lands here at number 4. And now for number 3, and these top 3 for me were very tough, all for completely different reasons. Here, we probably have the game that tells the most complex story of the bunch, and that is Yakuza 4. Now, Yakuza 4 is an interesting case because I feel like even though it gets compared a lot to Yakuza 5, in many ways it's kind of the antithesis to Yakuza 5 in my eyes, where despite it also having multiple characters, I feel like the approach it takes with those characters is completely different. Where in Yakuza 5, despite all the other characters involved in the story, Kiryu is still the main focus of that story. Kiryu's story is the main overarching narrative there. While here with Yakuza 4, it's the complete opposite, where Kiryu is really just in the background while all these other characters are taking the spotlight, with Akiyama, Seijima, and Tanemura all having much larger focuses in the grand scheme of that narrative. And Kiryu being there, kind of just feeling like fan service. I do also like how they connect the events of this game to the events of Yakuza 1, with a lot of Akiyama's backstory relating to the ending of Yakuza 1. Again, I think at this point, having the multiple playable characters was a nice breath of fresh air, especially coming from Yakuza 3, which just felt like a pointless experience overall, and it really felt like they had no clue what they were trying to even do there with the story. So here, with the multiple characters, even though it does make the game longer, it doesn't really feel bloated because we have these characters that we're getting to know. And the Kiryu chapter more so serves as a way to connect the story than it does in progressing Kiryu's character. And also through this game, again, I really liked the new characters. Like Akiyama is one of my favorite characters in the entire series. I really like Seijima's backstory within the course of this game. Tanemura I can go without as a character, but I do like the part that he plays within the story, with him actually kind of being the main character of the game. Overall, I do really like Yakuza 4. I do feel like it improves upon the formula that had gotten pretty stale by the time of Yakuza 3. And while Kiryu isn't necessarily the focus of this game, which could be looked at as kind of underwhelming considering how the series is focused on him up to this point, I still feel like it does a really good job at connecting itself to the rest of the series. Because I do really like Yakuza 4. The only reason it's not higher on the list is because I do feel like its story isn't as concise as the other two entries in this series. So for me, it ends up landing here at number 3. Now at number 2. At number 2, again, the top 2 here were very, very close for me. But here at number 2, I do have Yakuza Kiwami. Essentially Yakuza 1, which I've seen a lot of people be pretty down on, both the original and the Kiwami version. I see a lot of people down talk the original Yakuza as being a story that's less complex than the rest, and because of that not being as good. And then I see a lot of people talk about the Kiwami version being a really dumbed down version of Yakuza 0. And I will say to that, I agree with those sentiments. I do think Yakuza Kiwami is less complex, but I think it's better because of that. I do think it being as focused of an experience as it is why I really enjoy it. I really like this story of Kiryu, this guy that takes the blame for a crime he didn't commit, only to leave prison to find out that the people he spent that time in jail for are, one, Nishikiyama, someone who has become a radically different person, and then you have Yumi, who has disappeared, and you spend a lot of the game trying to find Yumi. And eventually this leads to us meeting up with Haruka and building the bond with Haruka. That really becomes one of my favorite elements of this series. I do love the relationship between Kiryu and Haruka, and some of my favorite plot elements of the entire series revolve around them. To me, this is the game in the series that feels the most focused and concise. But the thing that I will agree with as a knock against it is the sentiment that it is a dumbed down version of Yakuza 0 from a gameplay perspective. You can definitely tell that the Kiwami version here is essentially them taking Yakuza 0 and just putting Yakuza 1 story into it. Like, it pretty much is the same game, and that is a massive knock from a game standpoint, and is a lot of the reason why I can't have this game at number 1. Like, because even though I probably enjoy the narrative of this game more than any other game in the series, and to me personally, this game has the most notable moments of the series for me through, again, Kiryu meeting Haruka. We have Kiryu and his fight with Nishikiyama. We have all the Jingu stuff at the end. We have the stuff with Yumi. We have us meeting Date. We have so many elements of the story that I really do love. The gameplay is so bare bones that I really cannot justify putting this any higher, despite how much I do actually really love this game. So at the end of the day, Yakuza Kiwami does have to land here at number 2. Now number 1, the best game in the Yakuza series for me is, again, another opinion that I don't think most people agree with. But again, for me, this ticked off all the boxes I wanted to tick off, at least conceptually, though I did find certain elements of it pretty underwhelming. But overall, I do think this is still the best game in the series, and that is Yakuza 6, Song of Life. And again, for me, I think gameplay-wise, this is the best game in the series. I think with the new Dragon engine, it really made the city of Kamurocho and eventually Onomichi feel really alive. I feel like the way that you don't have loading screens when entering buildings anymore, I think that really livened up the open world. I think combat-wise, I had the most fun with the combat system of this game. Like, while it's not technically the best, I do think Yakuza 0 had a technically better combat system. I do think Yakuza 6's combat system allowed for a lot quicker fights, and through that I just enjoyed them a lot more. And narratively, I love what they did here conceptually. I think what they did with connecting this game to the plot of the original game, with Kiryu once again coming out of jail and having to figure out what's gone on since he's been put in jail. Again, a similar sort of story to what we saw from the first game. I think that was really great. I think basing this game's plot around figuring out what happened to Haruka, I think that's fantastic as well. However, I do think there's issues there in the sense that I do think this game kind of abandons a lot of characters that were prominent in the series beforehand. Again, with Majima, Seijima, and Daigo all being arrested over the course of this game's events, it is kind of underwhelming that they don't play a part within this game. Though I was pretty happy with the roles that Date and Akiyama both played in this game. But really, a lot of this game does focus on new characters. And again, for a final installment in the series, I do find that kind of underwhelming. Like, again, if this was like Yakuza 4 or Yakuza 5, it's fine, whatever. But as a game that portrays itself as the final game for Kiryu, I do find that underwhelming. And also, the ending that Kiryu gets in this game, I'm still very mixed on. I really don't know how to truly feel about it. I just don't feel like they execute it properly. I feel like the way they execute it makes it feel very rushed. It doesn't really end with me feeling very satisfied with where Kiryu ends up, making it seem kind of out of character for him in many ways. I don't know. I'm still very conflicted overall with how I feel about this game's story. For the first 2/3 of the game, I was really loving a lot of what this game was doing narratively. It's really just that back third where I think things start to unravel a bit, but I still enjoyed a lot of this game's story. And with that being on the back of this game's gameplay being really fun for me personally, I do feel like I have to put Yakuza 6 here at number 1. But there we go. I mean, that is my ranking of the entire Kiryu Saga. All 7 games here. And this is kind of the end of the journey here for Yakuza. Not really, because I still have other Yakuza videos planned. But at least when it comes to Yakuza 0 through 6, this definitely is the end of this video series I had planned for the series, where again, I did these more in-depth videos. Then here to have this series ranking them all, is kind of the wrap up to that. Now, I will say that I would like to do a video where I revisit Yakuza 0, because I do feel like my opinions would change on it quite a bit after a replay. But again, that is not for the immediate future. That is for some time down the road. But for now, that is the video here. Thank you for watching.